Hey, folks, I'm Sean C. Davis, and I have changed my mind. Actually, that's kind of a common occurrence with me. I'm really very talented when it comes to being a fickle sort of person. But no, really, and more seriously, as it relates to AI, it's just everything is moving so fast that I feel like having an open mind is going to get you to a better spot faster. And I mean, we don't want to be chasing squirrels constantly. And so we never get anything done as a result of always changing what we're doing. We at least need to be moving in some sort of direction. And I do feel like that is happening. I think there are times when I try something new and I come back a little bit and realize that maybe the way I was working previously was okay. But we're not really going to know that until we can start to tinker with other approaches. And that has happened to me over the last week or so. If you've been following any of my content, then you know that I've been tinkering constantly with building out my own custom agent team. And I've been doing that because I found that relying on these systems that have been established by other folks is really just it's not catered to me. It burns a ton of tokens and it just feels like it doesn't work great. And so what I set out to do was I essentially wanted this team that could work from start to finish with check-in points and to use Slack exclusively as the communication channel. And so I had all these different personas and these different agents that would work together. We had a project manager, we had an architect, we have a developer, we have four different QA agents, and then a workflow that stitched all of that together. And what I found was that I didn't really like it. There were parts of it that I loved. I loved the ability to just open up Slack, which I'm already in Slack all day, anyways, and say, oh, I got this idea. Here, go record this, project manager. And the project manager will ask a couple clarifying questions and then tell me when it's time to go. And so I was doing that and I really pushed on that. But what I found was that the the quality of the solution was really pretty low. And I think that was probably for a few different reasons, but I think it really comes down to how much effort did I put in ahead of time. So let take a look at this article that I wrote several months ago. I had written about this push toward asynchronous work. And my theory at this point, and my theory pretty much up until essentially this week, and what I've really been pushing toward, was that when you start a project out, it takes your full attention to develop that MVP. And there's a number of different approaches, and my approach has really evolved over time. In fact, I've taken a page out of Matt Pocock's book recently, in that kind of I've taken his spin on or I've taken my own spin on the grill me skill that he created, and have used that to help hone in on, hey, I have some idea, but I'm not going to implement it. So you, agent, are implementing it. So ask me just a bunch of questions until you basically have a 99% understanding of what we need to build, and you can take it until it is ready to be reviewed and tested. That has made a lot of sense for MVPs for me, because I've got this idea. There's nothing rooted yet that exists that can steer the agent in one way or another. It's a blank slate, aside from the skills that I might give it to get that project started. And so this made a lot of sense. But the theory that I was working with here was that we switched to async on this strong foundation. So what I was suggesting was that once you get to the point of having MVP, you have a direction for your project, you have a foundation for your project, and you've got all that logic that the agent can inherit from and make smart decisions, right? And when you hit bugs, they should be relatively easy to resolve because you have logs and you've got all this information already available to you, and the agent should be able to run, right? In theory, yes. But what I ran into this last week was I was basically working in these two ways. I was really pressing on the autonomous agent and really letting it run. And at the same time, I've got these projects for work in particular at Netlify that I just stay plugged into them all day. I mean, I come back and forth, but I'm keeping an eye and making sure that we're on the same page. It's moving in the right direction, and it's moving in some meaningful way every day. And I started to sense this pretty significant difference. And that is that, well, I guess there's probably two things here. The first is that as I'm keeping an eye on the synchronous agent that's running on my machine, I regularly get pinged for permission checks. And it's annoying, but it gives me the opportunity to kind of check in and be like, okay, well, where is this agent in this process right now? Because usually I'm giving it a big chunk of work at a couple times throughout the day. And so I get to check in and be like, I think it's going down a rabbit hole in a weird way. Or when it gets really stuck, I can dig in and work with it. And so I think I said two things, but really I think it's that. I just noticed that there's steering that happens within the day when I'm working with this synchronous agent, even though I'm not paying attention to it as much. Okay. No, there's a second thing. There's a second thing. And that second thing is that it's right there. So I've got my terminal pulled up all day. It's right there. It's in my face. I'm gonna go back. I might have 5 tabs open, but I'm gonna change through them. I'm gonna stay tapped in, even if it's, maybe 2 hours have gone by, but it's there. There's not a good way to ignore it. Slack, GitHub, etc., they just inherently come with so much noise. There's an infinite number of tabs, essentially, and they're just noisy by default. And so to me, that's really easy to forget about. There's a lot of power in the nature of asynchronous work. There's also a lot of opportunity to forget that the asynchronous work is happening. And when 100 things are happening all at the same time, it's the asynchronous thing that I'm going to forget about. Now, that doesn't make synchronous right. In contrast, it might mean something else is wrong with the system, but it was a signal that something was goofy. But when I put those two things together, I kind of had this aha moment in that, okay, it's a little bit hard to keep tabs on these. Now, I did address that, and I think I showed this in a recent video. But in Slack, there was this canvas. So whenever anything changed, the first thing that my orchestrator would do is it would update this canvas. And so I always kind of had this source of truth is this is where things stand. So that helped. But then what happened was I realized that it wasn't just about forgetting about these things. It was that these agents can get totally distracted and totally sidetracked. And if I don't give it really, 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 really strong direction at the beginning, and if there's like some level of ambiguity in the issue, some level that the agent needs to interpret and reason about, and if there's a decent amount of complexity paired with that ambiguity, there is no telling what's going to happen in these non-deterministic systems. And more often than not, it goes in a weird direction. And then we just have all of these points that could distract the ultimate solution. Because at first, I've got the architecture agent, which is essentially handling the discovery. So if there's a bug, it's going to look into what's the cause of the bug. If there's a bigger feature, it's going to build the architectural plan for me. And those are great because there is an approval point for me. But I started to see things where I was like, okay, that architect is getting distracted. But even if I like the architectural plan, then the developer, you have to count on the developing agent to implement that architectural plan appropriately. And then it makes sense to me that I have 4 different QA agents because they're all looking for something different. And in an automated system, QA is essential. But if any QA agent finds something, first of all, that QA agent, there's always a risk that it's slightly distracted. And if it's slightly distracted and it finds something, well, then the developer is going to go address that. But is it going to go down a rabbit hole that doesn't address the issue in the first place? So there were just all of these different levers and points throughout the process where the agents could get completely sidetracked. And so I started to think about this and I was like, I actually really like being tapped in to the development process. Now, I think there's an opportunity to play devil's advocate here. And I will say, and I want to come back to this earlier point, which is if I were to plan better to reduce the level of ambiguity, which could happen in a number of different ways. It could be working synchronously with an agent. It could be developing better skills. It could be that once you're further along in the project, it's a little bit easier. There's a number of different factors at play. Absolutely. What I have found is that I don't mind having a handful of things that I am tapped into, especially when the level of ambiguity and the level of complexity is a little bit raised. They're non zero values, let's just say. But what I really don't like is doing all of the manual project management repetitive kind of stuff. So the terminal windows that I've got Claude Code CLI running in, which could be like 100 at a time. It's not really 100, but it feels like 100 sometimes. When I type to those of like interact, go create this issue for me or something like that, it doesn't feel like the right surface. It's totally different if I'm like, here's this plan, here's this issue, here's this pull request, interact with it. Sure. That's like what a developer would do. But developers hate writing specs. Developers hate writing PRDs. Developers generally don't like doing the QA work. And so I started to think about this because I was like, this whole system isn't wrong. It's something within it that's wrong. And so what I've decided to do is it's like let's rip out the architecture part and let's rip out the development part, and then we'll build it back up. And I think I was trying to throw so much into it right away that the whole thing fell down. But I don't think the whole thing is the problem. So I'm tearing out the parts that I know are struggle and that I actually really like to do. That's the other thing that I should add to this too, is that there's a part of this which is I like doing that one-on-one planning work. I like watching the development happening. I like driving that development process. And so because I like those things, I'm also much more okay with being tapped in and doing that work synchronously. So here's what I did. Previously, now this is the rock tree system, and so all of the agent personas are named after rocks. So bear with me, it's a little bit cheesy. But essentially, we've got Flint, who is our project manager here. And what had happened here, and the way I was working with this, is Flint would help me scope the issue. So I would type something in Slack, it would respond. I'd say go. And then Slate would do my discovery. This was my architect. And then when I approved that, Basalt would write the code. And we have this orchestrator agent, and the orchestrator agent would handle opening the PR. Basically, the orchestrator agent does all of the writing so that the developer can't just totally run wild and tear everything down. And then we've got our automations here, and this is something I've worked on as well, which I will come back to. And then the communication comes back. Now there are communication points throughout here, but I was like, you know what? This part is the part I really don't mind doing. It's the, hey, I want to capture an issue at any time, no matter where I am. And I think using Slack as that surface works really well. And then on the other end of things, I love the idea of automated QA and testing, and I'm continuing to iterate on what that looks like. So I want to keep that in place as well. And so this is what we're doing now. We're going to scope the issue, and then it's up to me to pick it up. And so what I needed to do to be able to do that is come up with a way of working these things. And what I decided was that I would use skills that would tie into the system essentially. So when I'm ready to pick up an issue, I can run a plan, and I can do this synchronously, and then I can run the work, and then we can submit the work as a PR. And then the changes I've made to the CI is that I'm trying to get much more automated, and I didn't want to lose the value of CI in this process. And so what happens is I push to the pull request, it kicks off the deploy preview, and then that preview, and it will be different depending on the repo. But if the project has a UI, then it's going to have a deploy preview. If it has unit tests, it's going to run those in parallel through a GitHub action, as it would run it in parallel to the deploy preview. And then if it has acceptance testing, we want to use that in a production-like environment. So we're going to wait for the deploy preview to finish, and then we're going to use a hook to come back to GitHub and kick off um, the acceptance test, run through that. And then depending on the setup for a particular repo, finishing all of those automation tasks will then come back to the Rocktree team and say, okay, cool. The builds have passed, so there's not an objective problem. Now we've got these 4 QA agents who are going to run, give feedback. I'll get pinged when that feedback is through, and then I can peruse it and see, hey, is this relevant? Should it get addressed? Etc. What I can do if I'm like, hey, there's a bunch of stuff open, I can now ask Rocktree, which is Flint, what's open, and it's going to give me a bunch of answers, and they'll have links to them now. And so I know, okay, cool. I'm going to go into these. I can update them, or I can pick one up. And so let's say, self CTL 20 is still open. Okay, so let's say I wanted to address self CTL 20 and that hadn't been addressed yet. Then what I can do is I can open up Cloud Code CLI, and I can say Rocktree plan, and I could say number 20, and it's going to go in. It's going to fetch the information from issue number 20, and then we'll work together on a plan. And then when that's done, I can say work number 20, and then we can submit. It'll open the pull request. We can also look at the backlog to see everything that's open across the team's domain. So I'm very, very early in this process. I just did this yesterday. But what it does is, I just did this yesterday, but the flow that I'm trying to push on here is I want to leave the repeatable automation sort of things, and in particular, those chores, those things that I really don't want to do, try to automate those, and then just do all of my development work in the same way, in the same surface, and see what changes as a result of that. So we'll see how it goes. I'll have much more to update you on in the coming weeks. But in the meantime, I'd love to hear about your experiences with these automated teams. What's worked for you? Are you struggling with similar things? Are you finding ways to work asynchronously? Are you deferring to synchronous? Do you have just a different flow than I have? Always curious to chat and to learn more. My name's Sean C. Davis. I appreciate you all watching, and I'll see you next time.